Hi, my name's Rivka, and welcome to Torah Together for this Halloween Monday night. If you're a guest, please log in so you can comment and join in and maybe, hopefully, challenge me, because that would be really great. And if you're watching this video later on, please feel free to send feedback about the experience, what you'd like to see, what you want out of OneShul, because as Patrick always says, we are here for you, and it's your needs that we want to satisfy. So, while we're getting started here, we'll talk about Lech Lecha. It's Hebrew for go. And then also leave or go for you, which is the fifth and sixth words in Hebrew in the text. It's the third weekly portion in the annual Jewish cycle of Torah reading. It constitutes Genesis 12:1 to 17:27. It's read usually on the Sabbath after Simchat Torah, generally in October or November. So, little trivia there for you. So here's what we need to start out thinking. Imagine you're leaving on a journey to an unknown destination in response to an uncertain promise. Now imagine going on such a journey because God sent you. That, in a nutshell, is the story of our forefather Abraham. With the words, "Go forth from your native land and your father's house to a land that I will show you," Abraham begins not only a journey to distant land, but a journey of faith and self-discovery. The words of Lech Lecha literally mean go to yourself. Abraham sets out in search of self-definition. He is no youngster when he answers this call. In fact, he's close to 75 years old when he leaves home for the land of Canaan. So here we go. He's leaving for Canaan. Then what do we read? We're going to read Chapter 12, verse 1. The Eternal One said to Abram, "Go forth from your land, your birthplace, your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and it shall be blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will pronounce doom on those who curse you. Though you are the families of all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went forth as the Eternal had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram took his wife Sarah, his brother's son Lot, all the possessions they had amassed, and the people they had acquired in Haran. They set forth from the land of Canaan, and they arrived in the land of Canaan. Abram then traversed the land as far as the sacred site of Shechem, as far as the oak of Moreh. So, what do I have interesting to say about this? Well, Rabbi Judah deduced from Genesis 12:3, which is, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will pronounce doom on those who curse you. Though you are all the families of the earth, through you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." He said that it was to refuse to say grace when given a cup is one of the things that shorten a man's life. And Rabbi Joshua ben Levi deduced from Genesis 12:3 that every Kohen who pronounces the benediction is himself blessed. So, in doing these ritualistic actions, the blessing, the covenant comes back forth. And here's an interesting little midrash, and if you have time, you can look it up on Chabad's website. They have a Disneyized version of this midrash. And it asks, why God chose Abram. Rabbi Hiya said Abram's father, Terah, manufactured idols, and once went away and left Abram to mind the store. A woman came with a plate full of flour and asked Abram to offer it to the idols. Abram took a stick, broke the idols, and put the stick in the largest idol's hand. When Terah returned, he demanded that Abram explain what he had done. Abram told Terah that the idols fought amongst themselves, and the largest broke the others with the stick. "Why do you make sport of me?" Terah cried. "Do they have any knowledge?" Abram replied. "Listen to what you are saying." So, what are we to ask here? We ask, is this a way to ensure that Abram is depicted as monotheistic? Or do we ask, what does this parable explain about Abram and our own situations? And I think both questions ask relevant themes to each of us at some point in one's life. We're always in that point where we may not have to smash the idols, but traverse through them in order to find our path to Hashem. And it does support Abram being a monotheistic. So, now we'll continue on at verse 7. The Eternal now appeared to Abram and said, "I am giving this land to your descendants." Abram then built an altar there to the Eternal who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country east of Bethel. He pitched his tent between Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built another altar to the Eternal and called upon the name of the Eternal. And then Abram continued on his journey towards Nev. So, what do we have to say about verse 5, which I'll read again here? Abram took his wife Sarah, his brother Lot, and all the possessions they had amassed, and the people they have acquired in Haran. Resh Lakish deduced from Genesis 12:5 that the Torah regards the man who teaches Torah to his neighbor's son as though he had fashioned himself. So because Abram took his nephew Lot and basically was grooming him to be a man, he fashioned him in his own liking and did as though that was his son. So, we'll continue on the journey. There was a famine in the land, and because the famine in the land was severe, Abram went down to stay in Egypt. When he had almost reached Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, "Look now, I know what a beautiful woman you are. So when the Egyptians see you and say, 'This is his wife,' they may kill me. But you they shall keep alive. Please say that you are my sister, so that on your account it may go well for me, and that my life may be spared because of you." So, what do we have? We have this picture here. And indeed, when Abram arrived in Egypt, the Egyptians saw how exceptionally beautiful the woman was. When Pharaoh's ministers saw her, they lauded her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's palace. Through her it did go well for Abram, as he acquired sheep, cattle, and asses, male and female slave, she-asses, and camels. The Eternal then struck Pharaoh and his household with severe afflictions because of Sarah, Abram's wife. Pharaoh now summoned Abram and said, "What have you done to me? Why did you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say that she was your sister so that I took her as a wife for myself? Look now, that it turns out that she is your wife. Take her and be gone." Pharaoh then issued orders, and they drove him away with his wife and all that he owned. So now we get to chapter 13. And we see here, Abraham went up out of Egypt into Negev with his wife and all that he owned, and Lot accompanied him. Abram was very rich with livestock, silver, and gold. On his continuing march, he hiked from Negev as far as Bethel, up to the place where earlier his tent had been, between Bethel and Al, where he had first built an altar. There Abram called upon the name of the Eternal. Now Lot, who had gone with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support them both. They had so much prosperity that they could not remain together. A quarrel now broke out between Abram's cattle herders and Lot's cattle herders. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were inhabiting the land. Verse 8. Then Abram said to Lot, There should be no quarrel between you and me, and your herdsmen and mine, for we are close kin. The whole land lies before you. Pray, part from me. If you go north, I will turn south, and if you go south, I will turn north. Lot looked around and saw the whole Jordan plain, all of it well watered, this being before the eternal destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like a divine garden, like the land of Egypt as you get into Zoar, which is a place I want to stop. Abarhitra deduced from the words, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in Genesis 13:10, that among all the nations there was none more fertile than Egypt. And the Barita taught that there was no more fertile spot in Egypt than Zoan, where the kings lived, which is an important place throughout this entire portion. So, verse 11. So Lot chose the whole Jordan plain for himself, and moved away towards the east. They parted then, each from the other. Abram stayed in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled along the cities of the plain, pitching his tents as far as Sodom, whose people were wicked, hardened sinners against the Eternal. The Eternal One now said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, Look around from where you are, to the north and to the south, to the east and the west. For all the land that you see I am giving to you and your descendants forever. I will make your descendants like the dust of the earth. Only if one can count the dust of the earth will it be possible to count your descendants. And that's very interesting, as we have just made the 7 billion mark of people. Verse 17. Get up and walk about the land, its length and its breadth, for it is to you that I am giving it. Moving his tent, Avram went to dwell by the oaks of Mamre in Hebron. There he built an altar to honor the Eternal. Now we get to chapter 14. Verse 1. In the time of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Ariah, king of Elazar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. These 4 waged war against Bera, king of Sodom, Berisha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemimber, king of Zebum, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, the land of the kings. So Rabbi Levi, or some say Rabbi Jonathan, said that the tradition handed down from the men of the Great Assembly taught that whenever the Bible employs the term, and it was, or it came to pass, as it does in Genesis 14:1, it indicates misfortune, as one can read. It's woe, sorrow, thus the words, and it came to pass in the days of Amraphel in Genesis 14:1 are followed by the words, they made war in Genesis 14:2. And the Gemara also cited the instances of Genesis 6:1, followed by Genesis 6:5, and Genesis 11:12, and so on and so on and so on. Many cases where this particular linguistic idea came about, but hasn't really been explored that much. So, now we get to see the battle. Verse 4. For 12 years they had been subjected to Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year he and his allied kings came and subdued the Rephaim in Asherot, Kenarim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Sheve Ketaraim, and the Hortes in their hill country of Seir, as far as El Paran by the edge of the wilderness. They then returned, coming to En Mishpan, that is Kadesh, where they subdued the whole country of Amalek and the Amorites who dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, The king of Zeboim and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and arrayed themselves in battle formation against the enemy in the valley of Siddim. Against Shedalom, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elazar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was studded with tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some tumbled into them, and the rest fled into the hills. So they took all the possessions of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and their food, and they went off. And as they went off, they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, Abram's. When he positions with his possessions, he was a resident of Sodom. So what do we have to say about this? Rabbi Abahu and it said in Rabbi Eliezer's name that his trained men, that it says in Genesis 14, which we're about to get to, meant Torah scholars, and thus Abram made the fight to rescue Lot. He brought punishment on himself and his children, and were consequently enslaved in Egypt for 214 years. Now let's hear that section. Verse 10. Now the valley of Siddim was studded. 13. A fugitive then came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oak trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and Aner, who were allied to Abram by treaty. Hearing that his kinsman had been taken captain, Abram mustered his retainers born into his household, 318 of them, going in pursuit as far as Dan. So this is where the idea that they were Torah scholars and that was the consequence for being enslaved in Egypt is touted. Whether or not this is true, it's questionable. But it's an interesting little side note. Yes? Verse 15. At night he deployed himself and his forces against them, and defeated them, pursuing them as far as Hobath, north of Damascus. He then brought back all the possessions his nephew Lot too, and his possessions he restored, the women too, and the other people the king of Sodom gave out to meet him after his return to the valley of Shavev, that is, the king's valley, from fighting Shedalom and his allied kings. Now, Melchizedek, Melchizedek, you try and pronounce that, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High, and blessed him, saying, Blessed be Abram, by God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed is God Most High, who has given your foes into your hands. Then he, Abram, gave him 1/10 of everything. The king of Sodom now said to Abram, Let me have the people and keep the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the eternal God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, that I would take nothing of yours, not even a thread or a sandal strap. You shall not say, I enriched Abram, except what the troops have eaten, and the share due to the leaders who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their share. If you're a guest, please log in and let me know who you are and join in the conversation. We've just reached chapter 15. So, here we have Abram bowing to Hashem. After these things, the world of the Eternal came to Abram in a vision, saying, Have no fear, Abram. I am giving you an abundant reward as a gift. Abram then replied, Eternal God, what can you give me, when I am going to die, childless, and the heir to my household is Damascene Eliezer? Abram added, Look, to me you have given no offspring, and one of my slaves is my heir. But the Eternal One's words to him was, that one shall not be your heir, rather one who comes from your own body shall be your heir. Taking him outside, God said, "Turn your gaze towards the heavens and count the stars. If you can count them, and God promised him, so shall your seed be." And he put his trust in the Eternal, who reckoned that as loyalty in him, saying to him, "I am the Eternal who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as an inheritance." He then said, "Eternal God, how can I know what I take possession of?" Here is a most important question. Samuel said that Abram was punished because he questioned whether God would keep God's promise when in Genesis 15:8 Abram asked God, "How shall I know that I shall inherit it?" And Rabbi Yohan said that Abram was punished because he prevented people from entering beneath the wings of the Shekinah and being saved, when in Genesis 14:21 the king of Sodom said it to Abram, "Give me the persons and take the good yourselves." And Abram consented to leave the prisoners with the king of Sodom. So, now we come to an interesting part. Verse 9. God answered, "Bring me 3-year-old calf, a 3-year-old kid, a 3-year-old ram, and a young turtle dove." So he took these, and there split them, all but the bird in the middle, placing each half opposite the other. Vultures descended upon the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. Then as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and lo, a powerful dark dread was falling upon him. God said to Abram, "Know now that your descendants shall be strangers in a land not theirs. They shall be enslaved and afflicted for 400 years. But when I bring judgment upon the nation they are serving, after that they shall go out with many possessions. And you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in good old age. The 4th generation shall return here, for not until then shall the inquiry of the Amorites be repaid." Now then, the sun had set, and it was dark. Lo, a smoking oven and a fiery torch were what passed between these pieces. On that day the Eternal made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kezites, the Kedemites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Gerashites, and the Jebusites." Pardon my pronunciation. There's a lot of ites there. So, the Gemara expanded on Abram's conversation with God in Genesis 15:1 through 21, quoting Abram to ask, "Master of the universe, should Israel sin before you, would you do to them as you have done to the generation of the flood and the generation of the dispersion?" God replied, "No." Abram then said to God, "Master of the universe, let me know whereby I shall inherit it." God answered, "Take me a heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old." Abram then continued, "Master of the universe, this holds good while the temple remains in being, but when the temple will no longer be, what will become of them?" God replied, "I have already long ago provided for them in the Torah the order of sacrifices. And whenever they read it, I will deem it as if they had offered them up before me, and I will grant them pardon for their iniquities." So that's an interesting point to come from the Talmud about not having the temple anymore. So now we get to chapter 16. Now Abram's wife Sarah, who had not borne him a child, had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So Sarah sent to Abram, "Seeing as the Eternal has kept me from bearing a child, having intercourse with my slave, may I will have a son through her." Abram heeded Sarah's voice. So here we have an interesting depiction. Verse 3. 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarah took her slave Hagar the Egyptian and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. He came to Hagar, and she became pregnant, and when she saw what she had become pregnant, her mistress became for her an object of scorn. Sarah then said to Abram, "My wrong is on your head. I put my slave in your arms. No sooner did she see that she was pregnant, I became for her an object of scorn. Let the Eternal judge between us." So Abram went to Sarai. "Look, your slave is in your hands. Do to her as you please." Sarah then so afflicted her that she ran away, and an angel from the Eternal found her at the spring of water in the wilderness, in the spring on the high road of Shur. So this is a lovely landscape that depicts where Hagar would have gone. The Gemara taught that if one sees Ishmael in a dream, the son to be born by Hagar, then God hears the person's prayer, perhaps because the name Ishmael derives from "the Lord has heard" in Genesis 16:11, or perhaps because God heard Yishma Elohim, Ishmael's voice in Genesis 21:17, according to the Babylonian Talmud. So, verse 9, let's see. God then said to God spoke with him, saying, "As for me, here is my covenant with you. You shall be the father of a multitude of peoples. No longer are you to be called Abram. Your name is to be Abraham. And for I am making you the father of a multitude of nations. I am making you exceedingly fruitful and turning you into nations. Kings shall come forth from you. I will establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, for all their generations, everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. I will give you and your descendants after you the land where you have sojourned, the whole land of Canaan, and an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." God then said to Abraham, "As for you, observe my covenant, and you and your descendants after you in all generations. This is my covenant that you and your descendants after this are to observe. Let every male amongst you be circumcised." Here, notice that he said twice to follow my commandment. Verse 11. "When the flesh of your foreskin has been circumcised, it shall become a sign of the covenant between us. And in all your generations let every 8th-day-old boy among you be circumcised, whether it be a homeborn slave or brought from foreigners, not of your own descent. Let your homeborn slave and the one you buy be circumcised, so that my covenant may be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. An uncircumcised male who has not circumcised the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people and has broken my covenant." So, chapter 17, we're coming to the end here. I promised you only about 30 minutes. Here we have verse 17. Abraham fell flat on his face and laughed, thinking, verse 15. God then said to Abraham, "Sarah, your wife, call her Sarai no more, for her name is now Sarah. I will bless her, and too, I will give you a son through her. I will bless her, and she shall become nation. Rulers of people shall come from her." Abram fell flat on his face and laughed. Can a child be born to a man of 100? Can a 90-year-old Sarah bear a child? Abraham then said to God, "If only you would let Ishmael live happily before you." But God said, "Nonetheless, your wife Sarah will bear you a son, whom you shall call Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him and his descendants after him as everlasting covenant. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. See, I have blessed him and made him fruitful and made him exceedingly numerous. He will father 12 princes. I will make him into a great nation. But it is with Isaac whom Sarah will bear for you at this time next year that I will establish my covenant. Done speaking with him, God ascended away from Abraham. Notice how repeatedly this idea of the covenant comes up. Rabbi Judah contrasted the words Noah walked with God in Genesis 6:9 with God's words to Abraham, walk before me in Genesis 17:1. Rabbi Judah compared it to a king who had two sons, one grown up and the other a child. The king asked the child to walk with him, but the king asked the adult to walk before him. Similarly to Abraham, whose moral strength was great, God said, walk before me. But of Noah, whose strength was feeble, Genesis 6:9 says, Noah walked with God, which I find very interesting syntax-wise. Rabbi Amir Bar Abba employed Gematria to interpret the meaning of Abram's name change in Genesis 17:5 from Abram to Abraham. According to Rabbi Amir Bar Abba, at first God gave Abram mastery over 243 of his body parts, as the numerical value of the Hebrew letters in Abram is 243. Then God gave Abraham mastery over 248 of his body parts, adding 5 body parts as the numerical value of the Hebrew letter He. That is, God added to his name 5. The Gemara explained that as a reward for Abraham undergoing circumcision, God granted Abraham control over his 2 eyes, his 2 ears, and the organ that he circumcised. Verse 23. Abraham then took Ishmael his son and all his homeborn slaves, and those who had been bought, every male among Abraham's slaves. And on that very day Abraham circumcised the flesh of their foreskin as God had instructed him. Abraham was 99 years old, and when he circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. That very day both Abraham and Ishmael his son were circumcised, and all the people of his household, the homeborn slaves and those bought from foreigners, were circumcised with him. Rabbi Hama, son of Rabbi Hananiah, taught that visiting those who had medical procedures, as Abraham did in Genesis 17:26, demonstrates one of God's greatest attributes that humans should emulate. So that brings us to the end of this week's Torah portion. And I will say to you that I hope you are able to help support this program. If you've enjoyed tonight's programming, please donate. You're welcome to donate money through PunkTorah at gmail.com on PayPal. If you don't have money, your chosen craft, you could donate something like basket weaving, or you could donate your time and do a service or a class. Anything that adds to the community is of the utmost value. Now, should you want to give feedback or have any questions you want answered, please email me, Rivka, or Patrick at PunkTorah.org. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a lovely Halloween evening.